Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on something a little different. We're going to be talking about Stoicism and its connection to modern politics.
Oh, wow.
And to help us with this, we have Valérie Laurent's book, La Politique Stoïcienne.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, when we think of Stoicism, we often think of it as like a philosophy for personal resilience. But what if it could offer like a blueprint for a just and harmonious society?
That's a really interesting idea. Laurent argues that Stoicism is not just about individual self-improvement.
Yeah.
It provides a framework for political action and social change.
So, how can this ancient philosophy apply to our messy modern world?
Well, one of the core concepts that Laurent explores is this idea of oikiosis.
Oikiosis.
It's this innate impulse for self-preservation and flourishing that all living beings have.
Okay.
And you see it in nature all the time, like
Yeah.
a plant glowing towards sunlight or a bird building a nest.
Right.
It's that drive to survive and thrive.
So how does that basic instinct for survival connect to politics? It seems like a big jump from a plant reaching for the sun to solving climate change.
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. The Stoics believe that this impulse, this oikiosis,
Right.
it naturally extends beyond just ourselves.
Right.
It leads us to care not just about our own well-being, but also the well-being of others.
Okay, I'm struggling with this a little bit. How can focusing on my own flourishing lead to the well-being of others? That feels kind of counterintuitive.
Okay, think of it this way. Imagine a crab living inside a seashell. The crab benefits from the shell's protection.
Yeah.
But by living in it, the crab might also help to maintain the shell's integrity.
Oh.
It's this mutually beneficial relationship.
Interesting.
The Stoics believe that our individual flourishing is intertwined with the flourishing of others. And it's not about ignoring your own needs, but understanding that they're connected to the needs of the community.
So it's not a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another person's loss.
Right.
It's more like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. And that challenges the assumption that self-interest and the common good are always in conflict.
So this is making me think about those prepper communities where people are hoarding resources and preparing for societal collapse.
Right.
Is that what a Stoic would do?
Well, the Stoics wouldn't advocate for isolating yourself from society or hoarding resources at the expense of others.
Okay.
Remember, they believe in this idea of the cosmopolitan or the citizen of the world.
Right. But what does that look like in action? How would a Stoic actually navigate the political landscape?
Well, Laurent talks about this concept of the Stoic sage. It's this sort of ideal model of virtue and wisdom. Imagine a leader who embodies those qualities.
Okay.
Someone who makes decisions based on reason and justice, always considering the well-being of the community.
So a Stoic sage is like the ideal politician.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay. But how would they deal with real-world dilemmas?
Yeah.
Like those tough ethical choices that politicians face all the time?
Well, Laurent uses this fascinating example from Cicero to illustrate this. Imagine a shipwreck.
Okay.
And there's only one piece of driftwood left.
Oh, my God.
And two people clinging to it for survival.
Wow.
One is a wise person and the other's a fool.
That's a tough one.
Who gets to survive?
Wow. It's like that classic lifeboat dilemma. What do the Stoics say?
Well, the Stoics would argue that ideally, the wise person should prioritize the person whose life is more valuable to the community. But it's not just about doing the right thing. It's about doing it for the right reasons.
So even in like a life or death situation, the Stoic sage is thinking about the greater good, guided by virtue and a deep understanding of natural law.
Exactly.
This idea of natural law seems pretty crucial to Stoic politics.
It is. The Stoics believed in two coexisting cities.
Good.
The perfect city of the universe, governed by natural law.
And then the imperfect cities of humans striving towards that ideal.
I'm grappling with this idea of the two cities. It feels very idealistic.
Right.
But is there a way to bridge that gap between the ideal and the reality?
Yeah.
How does that tension play out in our daily lives?
That's a great question. It's about recognizing that even within imperfect systems, there's potential for growth and positive change.
Right.
And it's about individuals striving to live in accordance with natural law, even amidst the chaos of the human city. But this brings up another interesting point.
Okay.
How would a Stoic approach something like property ownership?
Yeah, that seems pretty grounded compared to these lofty ideas about natural law and universal cities.
Well, it turns out there are actually two contrasting Stoic views on property.
Oh.
One is what Loran calls a pre-capitalist model,
Okay.
emphasizing individual ownership.
Got it.
It's based on this quote: "Each has the right to make use of the portion that has fallen to his lot, to consume it."
So the state wouldn't interfere much in economic matters.
But isn't ambition and striving for more a part of human nature?
Yeah.
How do the Stoics reconcile that with the idea of individual ownership?
Well, that's where the emphasis on virtue comes in.
Okay.
While individuals have the right to acquire property, it shouldn't come at the expense of others or lead to excessive accumulation. The focus should be on meeting basic needs and ensuring that everyone has access to the essentials for survival.
That makes sense. So what's the other Stoic view on property?
The other perspective is what Loredan describes as more socialist,
Okay.
prioritizing the equal distribution of essential goods.
Okay.
It draws inspiration from historical figures like the Gracchus brothers, who advocated for land reform in ancient Rome.
Interesting.
This view argues that the state has a responsibility to ensure that everyone benefits equally from the resources that nature provides.
Wow. So even on something as concrete as property, there's a diversity of thought within Stoicism. It's not just about embracing one rigid economic model.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so relevant today.
Yeah.
Stoicism isn't about providing easy answers or advocating for a specific political system. It's about providing a framework for thinking about these complex issues and making decisions based on virtue, reason, and a deep understanding of our interconnectedness.
Exactly.
This is already making me rethink my own assumptions about politics and what it means to be a good citizen. It's fascinating to see how these ancient philosophical ideas can still be so relevant today.
Absolutely. It's all about applying that timeless wisdom to the challenges of our modern world.
So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dive into how a Stoic sage would actually engage in politics.
Okay.
Would they run for office, lead protests, or write policy papers?
Well, Loran argues that the sage's political engagement takes multiple forms.
Okay.
And we'll explore those different avenues right after.
So before we got sidetracked by property and economics, we were talking about how a Stoic sage would actually get involved in politics.
Right.
Would they be out there leading protests or campaigning for office?
Well, it's not necessarily about outward actions.
Okay.
Loran emphasizes that a sage's political influence can be more subtle. They might focus on shaping the thoughts and actions of those in power.
Oh.
Think about Seneca, who tried to guide Emperor Nero towards a more virtuous path through his writing.
Oh, so even if they're not directly holding power, they could still be like influencing things in the right direction.
Yeah, kind of like an advisor or influencer.
Right.
And of course, a sage could also participate more directly by holding office or contributing to the creation of laws. Like, there's this quote that highlights this. The wise man will take part in politics if nothing prevents him.
Oh, okay.
So it's not about adhering to one specific political system or ideology.
It sounds like the Stoics were more focused on like the principles behind the actions.
Yes.
Rather than the specific form those actions take.
Exactly. The key is adapting to the circumstances while staying true to those core Stoic values of virtue, justice, and reason.
So no marching in the streets with placards or delivering fiery speeches.
Not necessarily. Remember, the Stoics weren't advocating for passivity or detachment. It's about engaging with the world in a way that aligns with their principles.
Okay.
This brings us to another fascinating aspect of Stoic political thought.
Yeah.
The emphasis on family and education.
Okay, this is where I get a bit lost. How do family and education fit into the Stoic vision of a just society?
Well, think about it this way. How can you hope to create a just and harmonious society if you're not instilling those values in the people who will eventually shape it?
So it starts at home.
Exactly. The Stoics saw marriage and family as fundamental forms of civic duty. Raising children, especially educating them in Stoic principles, is crucial for nurturing the next generation of virtuous citizens.
It's like building that foundation for a just society.
Right.
Brick by brick.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that require a massive cultural shift? I mean, Stoicism isn't exactly mainstream these days.
Well, that's where the idea of the sage comes back into play. They might not be able to single-handedly transform society, but they can create those ripples of change through their actions and interaction within their families and communities.
So it's about leading by example, showing people how to live a virtuous life, even in a less than perfect world.
And remember, the Stoics recognized that the ideal of a perfectly virtuous society is aspirational. The goal isn't necessarily to achieve it in its absolute form, but rather to constantly strive towards it.
So it's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
But how do we even begin to apply these Stoic principles in our own lives? Especially when it comes to politics. It all feels so grand and philosophical.
It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Start by reflecting on the core Stoic values: virtue, reason, justice, and living in harmony with nature. Ask yourself how those principles might guide your actions in your personal relationships, in your community, and even in the political choices you make.
Okay, that makes it feel more manageable. So it's not about becoming a Stoic sage overnight. It's about taking those small steps and making conscious choices that align with those values.
And remember, the Stoics believe that even small actions done with the right intention can have a ripple effect. You don't have to lead a political revolution to make a difference. It can start with how you treat your family, how you engage in your community, and how you vote in elections.
I like that. Making those everyday choices count. But I'm still wondering, how do we reconcile this idea of living in accordance with natural law with like the messy reality of our political systems? I mean, it's easy to get cynical about politics these days.
That's where the Stoic emphasis on focusing on what's within our control comes in. We can't control the actions of others, but we can control our own responses.
It's about staying true to those Stoic principles. Even when surrounded by chaos and injustice.
Exactly. And remembering that even within imperfect systems and flawed individuals, there's always potential for growth and positive change.
I like that.
But, you know, we haven't even touched on one of the most relevant aspects of Stoic philosophy for today's world.
Oh, really?
Their perspective on wealth consumption and what constitutes a good life.
In a world obsessed with material possessions and instant gratification. I'm really curious to hear what the Stoics have to say about that.
Well, that's a deep dive for another day.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. From oikiosis to the Stoic sage, from natural law to the two cities, and even contrasting views on property. But like, what does all of this mean for us in the 21st century? How can we actually apply these Stoic principles to our lives, especially when it comes to politics?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it starts with recognizing that Stoicism isn't about providing easy answers or dictating specific political actions. It's about offering a framework for thinking critically about these complex issues and making decisions guided by virtue, reason, and a deep understanding of our interconnectedness.
But it still feels a bit daunting. Like, how can I, as one individual, really make a difference in the face of such, like, massive political challenges?
Remember that concept of oikiosis we talked about earlier? That interconnectedness applies not just to our personal relationships, but to the entire social and political fabric. The Stoics believe that even small actions done with the right intention can create ripples of change.
So it's not about becoming a Stoic sage overnight. Or, like, single-handedly transforming the political landscape. It's about those small, everyday choices that reflect those core Stoic values.
Exactly. Think about how you treat the people around you, how you engage in your community, how you consume information and form your opinions. Do you approach these things with a sense of fairness, reason, and a willingness to consider different perspectives?
This is making me think about how easily we get caught up in those online echo chambers. Where everyone just reinforces their own biases. Maybe a more Stoic approach would be to, like, actively seek out diverse viewpoints.
Absolutely.
Even those that challenge our own assumptions.
That's a perfect example of how Stoic principles can be applied in a very practical way. Instead of retreating into those comfortable echo chambers, actively engage with those who hold different views. You might not change their minds, and they might not change yours, but you'll both come away with a broader understanding of the issue.
And that seems to be a key theme running through all of this, that idea of constant learning and striving for wisdom.
Exactly. The Stoics believed that wisdom is an ongoing process, not a destination. It's about constantly challenging our own assumptions, seeking out new knowledge, and refining our understanding understanding of how to live a virtuous life.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. It's made me realize that Stoicism isn't just some dusty old philosophy.
Yeah.
It's like a practical guide for navigating the complexities of our modern world.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to politics.
I couldn't agree more. And it's so relevant today when it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the state of the world and powerless to make a difference.
Right.
Stoicism reminds us that we do have power, even if it's just over our own choices and actions.
Right.
And those choices, those small acts of virtue and reason, can create a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
So what's like the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with today?
I think it's this. Don't underestimate the power of individual action guided by those core Stoic values of virtue, reason, and a deep understanding of our interconnectedness. You don't have to become a Stoic sage or lead a political revolution to make a difference.
Right.
It starts with those small, everyday choices.
Beautifully said. So for all our listeners out there, we leave you with this challenge. What Stoic principle resonated most with you today, and how can you apply it to your own life, whether it's in your personal relationships, your community involvement, or even your political choices?
Think about it. Maybe it's embracing that sense of oikiosis, recognizing that we're all interconnected, or maybe it's focusing on what's within your control and letting go of what isn't. Whatever it is, we encourage you to explore these ideas further and see how they might inspire you to live a more meaningful and engaged life.
And who knows, maybe you'll even find yourself inspired to run for office someday.
That's right.
Just kidding, but hey, maybe not.
You never know where this Stoic journey might lead you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.
Absolutely.
This was Deep Stoicism Podcast. Apply one of today's principles and share it with others. Stay wise, and see you next time.